Hey guys, it's Becca. It has once again been 1 million or so years since I made a video, but I am here today because I just finished Justin Donaldson's Learn to Paint in Gouache course, and I really liked it and I wanted to tell you guys about it. So I will tell you a little bit about it and then show you all my work from the course. To give you a little background, it is usually run as a live course, so he runs it a couple times a year as an 8-week long course. But he also offers a self-paced option for those of us who can't finish anything in 8 weeks, which is basically me right now. So I went through this at an absolute snail's pace. I mean, so slow. That's actually probably insulting to a snail. So slow. It took me months. But I learned so much, and I just felt like taking it at my own pace helped me spend more time on the stuff that I really needed to work on. I've always loved gouache. I've always loved the look of gouache, but anytime I attempted to paint in gouache, I just felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And I knew that gouache had sort of an incredible range of capacities and so many different types of artists work in gouache, but I just hadn't ever spent the time to learn how to actually use the medium. So the reason I picked this course in particular is because it's not just a general painting class, a 101 painting class. It's very much a here's how to use gouache as a medium class. So if you've never taken a painting class, I would probably notch down to a slightly simpler class before taking this. You do need to know basic perspective, basic color mixing, some of the basic color stuff and composition elements. But if you do have some background knowledge, I do feel like after taking this class, I'm totally ready to take a more specialized gouache class. So if I wanted to take a landscape class or I wanted to take a portrait class, I feel like I can use the medium well enough that I could kind of focus on some of the more sophisticated elements that you can learn. All right, now for the good stuff. I will show you all of the work that I did, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and kind of give you a little overview of the different elements that you learn and that Justin goes over in his course. So let's look at some paintings. You will see from the start that this is definitely your classic wax on, wax off fundamentals course. There's not a lot of flashy stuff at the beginning. A lot of it is just pick and shovel practice where you learn the skills that you can then implement later. All right, we'll start with color mixing. So this is something that you work on throughout the whole course. And what you do is get a big stack of swatches and you match them. And sometimes this can be very therapeutic if your colors are matching up and you're getting it on the first try. Sometimes it takes a few tries and you just can't quite figure it out. But ultimately, Justin has a lot of great tips for how you start. Do you start with white? Do you start with color? Like how to correct something if you've gone totally wrong. This is a great practice. It's really helpful, and you get better and better as you're going, and the more practice you have with mixing paint, the better you get at matching colors. So not the most exciting, but super, super useful skill to have. The next thing is consistency. So one very challenging thing in gouache is getting a consistent value whether you're using opaque or transparent paint. And ultimately this just takes practice. You have to get the right amount of water, you have to get the right amount of paint, you have to apply it in a consistent way, and you're also dealing with the fact that certain pigments just want to fight you more than others. As you can see, like the red makes a beautiful, pretty flat, transparent color. The blue, when you get into these middle areas, for whatever reason, the pigment just breaks up more. So all of this is just practice, adding a little more water, adding a little less water, adding a little more paint, that kind of thing. And then over time, you get a lot better and you can start getting these really consistent swatches. And ultimately improving at least some of these middle values that are a little bit trickier when you're kind of in between transparent, in between opaque. But I'd actually never spent any time trying to do this, and this really paid off a lot in the next exercise. You're also looking at what happens if you do transparent over transparent or opaque over opaque. So just a lot of experiments to get you thinking about why you're doing something and being intentional about the level of opacity in the paint that you're applying. After practicing this, you work on some larger studies. Again, just focusing on that flat paint application, which I was kind of amazed at, having done really not that much practice, at how consistent I was able to get my paint once I kind of had mastered those swatches, maybe not mastered, but improved getting that correct paint consistency. So you can see these are pretty flat. I'm getting a lot of flat values here. Some things could be improved. But as an exercise, I felt like, okay, I get this. I can use this tool now, and now I can paint flat colors. This was another one that we later added water to, but the general idea is that you're getting these big flat colors, and you don't always want to use that, but you do want that to be available to you when you want it. All right, gradients. So unlike maybe oil paint or watercolor paints, gouache just doesn't like to do gradients, and it's a bit of a fight. Justin has a lot of good tips for getting kind of cleaner gradients, and as you can see when I started, they're just really streaky, and then towards the end I had a lot more control from getting something that looks very smooth instead of that sort of choppy gradient that you tend to see more often in gouache. Also working on multiple color gradients, so getting nice values that aren't muddy. That's another challenging thing that comes up with gouache. You just end up with a lot of these kind of brown values sometimes, and there are tricks to work around that, and you can see that you can just sort of see the mistakes I'm making and how you resolve them. For example, these do not have enough paint. That's why they look a little washed out. And then in this one, I had enough paint, enough pigment, and it came out much, much better. But yeah, all different kinds of gradients, multiple colors, sort of thinking about sunsets or making sure that you don't get that brown in between. Looking at gradients and shapes, and then just, thinking about how they can be used in your own kind of paintings. So obviously landscape painting is a bit of an obvious one, but, a sky gradient, a landscape gradient, you can do little gradients in the mountains, that kind of thing, and seeing how that could be applicable to the type of painting that you might like to do. Value. Okay, so one of the trickiest, most challenging and frustrating things about gouache, for me personally, is that it changes value when it dries. So these darker colors get lighter, and these lighter colors get darker. And this little exercise was kind of experimenting with making step-by-step gradients and looking at which paints change when they dry, can you match them once they're dry, just getting a little bit of an introduction to being more controlled about your values, and then using those skills on a more finished, challenging painting. Full disclosure, I literally hate this kind of painting. It was so boring. This was where I almost had to stop the course because I just could not take it, but I powered through and I learned a lot. I think it's just a challenging type of painting for me, so I had to correct a lot of mistakes, but in the end, it's probably worth it. If it's that hard, you're probably getting something out of it, and I do feel like I have a lot more control now with my values than I did before, and I'm better at guessing when things will get darker or lighter. Another thing you work on is working from wet to dry, so prepare to look at a lot of rock paintings. This I really struggled with at first because I couldn't get the timing right, and I would kind of panic and put too much wet paint on and then wait too long or go too early to try and get the details. So there's a lot of just practice involved with this, but you can see kind of as I'm going on that I'm getting a little bit more control, that I'm getting a little bit more intentional about when I start to get the details in there and that sort of thing, and it's not just panicked slapping paint on. And then over time, the more I did of these, the more I started to really kind of get the hang of it and see just sort of some of the really beautiful effects that you can get in gouache that you can kind of only get if you work wet to dry, like some of these transparent areas with opaque over them. So it's really cool texture that doesn't feel so flat as you think of regular gouache. And then towards the end, just feeling like I was really getting the hang of it and having more control over the colors and the textures and getting this, almost watercolor texture with the gouache overlay. And this was super exciting for me because I felt like, okay, this is something I could definitely use, and I'm glad that I put in the time to kind of develop that workflow and better understand the tool. And then at the end, you take a stab at a painting, putting everything you learned together. So this is a little crazy, but I think this is the only landscape painting I've ever done in paint, ever. So there's some weird stuff going on here. The colors are a bit much, but I do think it's really interesting to see all of the different things that I learned in this course at play in one painting. So you have obviously the gradient here, working with transparency, working with opaque paint, getting these really beautiful, soft, blended kind of splotchy textures, and also working in really wet paint at the bottom that almost has that watercolor look. beautiful gradients and, working with transparency and intentionally using opaque paint over transparency. So I'm never going to be a landscape painter. That's definitely not in the cards for me, but I can totally see how you can use all of these specific skills in any kind of painting you want, just because it shows you how versatile that gouache really is. And the last sort of insane attempt to do a master copy of this painting you might recognize. It's a Bouguereau oil painting. This would not be a practical choice of portrait for gouache, just because, like I was saying earlier, gouache kind of fights gradients a little bit, and this is a really soft painting. That being said, that's kind of the point of the exercise. It's to push what you think gouache can do, and in the end, it's really cool to see how different gouache can look than the sort of stereotypical beliefs that you have about it. There's a lot of beautiful textures in here. You're just able to get some, it's not oil paint, right? But you can get some really soft transitions, some subtlety, some of this sort of almost watercolor texture again that you just don't think of with gouache. So, obviously the skin tone's a bit weird. There's some weird stuff going on, but like I said in the last one, it's just cool to see the different things you can do and just how far you can push gouache. It's exciting to me to think about all the different ways that I can use this in my own work moving forward. As usual, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.